Hey friends, it's your pal Mike Shea from Sly Flourish with a special Saturday episode of the Lazy D&D Talk Show. This episode serves a couple of three purposes, I guess. Purpose one is I got some new audio hardware, and I want to try it out and make sure it sounds okay on a show that is not quite as critical. I had time to kill, and nothing like killing time like going on and doing a stream and talking about D&D. And three, I had a good question from a patron of a Sly Flourish patron that I wanted to talk about that isn't really directly D&D related. And I don't typically like pulling back the curtains and talking about things behind D&D. So I thought this would be like a nice fun episode on the side to talk specifically about making things, creating stuff. So we'll talk about that, and hopefully we'll have a chat. This show, like all of the work of Sly Flourish, is brought to you by the patrons of Sly Flourish. If you are enjoying this show or any of the shows that I do, anything else like it, please feel free to support me by going to patreon.com/SlyFlourish and signing up. Patrons of Sly Flourish get access to all kinds of good material. They get previews of upcoming work that I'm doing. They get exclusives. They get all kinds of things. And they get to recently I've been taking patron questions from Patreon patrons. One of them is going to be today. We're going to do a big long show about one question that one patron asked. So it's a good opportunity to reach out. But most of all, it helps support shows like this. It helps me put on shows like this and make sure I have all the equipment and all the costs and things like that. So yeah, it's all good. Meerkat Manor Descendant says, yep, verify that the patron stuff is great. Thank you. I try to over-deliver on everything, but I try to over-deliver on the Patreon. Yeah, so today's episode is how the sausage is made. So the question was from Jason S. on Patreon, said, I'm interested in the process that you use to go from an idea to a finished published product. What advice would you tell yourself when you first started creating products? How do you find artists, mappers, layout artists, and editors? How is the sausage being made? I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's pretty close. That's pretty close to it. So yeah, how does that happen? How does a tiny little butterfly of an idea floating through the breeze turn into a book that is sitting on people's shelves is the question. And this is something I haven't answered. So I'm going to ponder this. We're going to stick this all the way down. I got a lot of notes for this little talk today. What advice would you tell yourself when you first started creating products? I think I have an answer to that. So yeah, so this is a making sausage episode of Sly Flourish, right? What happens that takes some random idea and turns it into a physical book that sits on your shelf like this guy here, my book, Fantastic Adventures, Ruins of the Grundle Root, a book I am tremendously proud of. I'm proud of all of my books, but I'm particularly proud of that one. So the reality is that I usually let the idea stir around for like a year. I am about to launch my Kickstarter on the 28th of September for the Lazy DM's Companion, the third of the Lazy Dungeon Master books. And I've been thinking and working on the Lazy DM's Companion, really, I mean, as long as I've been working on anything, right? Like ideas that are in it have been stirring around for a long time. But really sat down and worked on it probably when? It would probably be at the latter parts of the Fantastic Layers time. So this would be late. God, the years are all gone. But I've certainly been working on it all this year. And I think I was working on a good few months of last year. I'd have to actually go back and look. But the idea stirs around for like a year, right? I usually have the seed of the idea a year ahead of time and start to really think about it and ponder it and let it sit in the back of my mind and try out little things and talk to people about it and talk to my wife about it before anything like really happens, right? And that's before I actually start writing it. And then certainly in the case of the Lazy DM's Companion, but also in the case of other books, I'll do little prototypes, like 1 or 2 page things, articles for Sly Flourish, discussions here on Twitch and on YouTube, things that I'll run for my friends, ideas that I will run for my friends, and pages that I will throw out to the patrons of Sly Flourish to talk about as well. I certainly did that with the Lazy DM's Companion. And that idea of like trying out ideas, right? Sitting on an idea, trying it out, writing it up, passing it along and seeing where it goes. I think that works. I think that works really well. So let's see. I lost my window. Then something that has to kind of be real is that Not every idea that you have is something actually people want, right? And the example is that like Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master, very successful. Ruins of the Grendel Root, it's fine. It did fine, but not nearly as well as Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master did. So it's like adventure books. I like writing adventure books. I would probably write more adventure books, but I recognize that like those aren't as big a draw. Those aren't as interesting to people as other kinds of products. And certainly if you look at like what the more popular Kickstarters are these days, the kinds of products that people really dig, the stuff that sells, and I think I've talked about this, the stuff that sells isn't necessarily what you want to produce. The stuff that sells isn't necessarily the stuff I want to produce. And I'd also argue the stuff that sells doesn't always mean it's actually useful. Like it might be great and you might pay $20 and you get your PDF and it looks beautiful and you open it and you flip through and you like it. But does it actually help you run a game? Does it actually get used at the table, right? The examples I use are like character options. Like character options are cool and they sell well. People love buying character options and they love buying books of spells and stuff like that. And Kobold Press has run many. They're running a Kickstarter right now for a bunch of character options, which is awesome, right? Do they get used at the table though? Now, certainly I'm thinking of a different perspective too, which is I'm a DM focused guy. I focus on what it takes to run games, right? Not so much what it takes to be a player in a game. That's just not because we don't need players. I love players, right? We need them. It's just not my thing, right? It's not the angle I like to take. So you're not going to see like Sly Flourish's guide to player character options. Like, that's not for me. But there's lots of stuff, and like I backed the Kobold Press Kickstarter, and I want to use it myself, and I think it's doing very well. Let's take a gander here. Look for Tome of Heroes is their latest Kickstarter, right? 4 days left to go. Yeah, right. It's making more than $250,000, right? So fantastic. 5,200 backers, $250,000. Yeah, more than $250,000. So, who am I to say like people don't want this stuff? But the question is like people want it and they'll buy it. And I'm sure the product will be outstanding. How often will it get used at the table is a good question, right? Hopefully a lot, because I think there's a lot of stuff here. And I wish it would get used more. And next gets into the whole, like, it's not D&D Beyond, so that makes it a problem. Boy, it's going to look great. So some of the ideas that you come up with aren't necessarily the things that people want. And there's that balance of like, are you willing to do it anyway? Does it matter if most people don't want it, right? If I want to write like new stuff for a particular game system nobody's played, right? Can I be upset if they don't buy it, right? That's a question. So adventures don't sell like other material does is something. It is probably 2 years from the time I start thinking about an idea till the time there's a product on someone's table. And that's probably at least a good solid year of actually working on the thing, not pondering it, not doing prototypes, not testing things, but actually writing the book is usually from the time I start writing it to the time the book is in people's hands is probably a year. And that can change. A lot of things can change in that. Like Fantastic Lairs, I think took us a little bit longer than that from the time we started to the time we put it in people's hands. Because there was a lot to do. It was a great big book. It was like 240% of the size we were planning. It was really big, or 230%, right? We were 10 layers originally and ended up with 23. So a lot of work to do. Now, a philosophy that I have that not everybody has is I would rather do a few big books on big meaty topics that take me a year to really ponder than do a ton of small products. And this is definitely, there's not a good way. That's not that way is better than another way. And two examples I'll give of people who don't do it that way and are very successful are Empty Black and Raging Swan, right? Raging Swan Press and Empty Black. Both of them put out tons of material. And the advantage that they have in doing so is they can really try a lot of stuff out and try it in a commercial world, in a commercial sense, and see what kind of feedback they get. Where I might write a book and it might take me 2 years and it turns out no one wanted it. Right? Now, I usually have done some kind of testing ahead of time to know that it's at least going to be moderately successful. And Kickstarter is a good method to determine, is this commercially viable enough to pay for itself, right? And so I think that both paths are good. I'm just just my style, my interest, and I guess my flow, the way that I've been doing it has worked for me, which is like me putting out one book a year would be great. And that usually means, and in fact, it's going to be probably, I think this one's like 18 months or so. It might even be more because I probably, the PDF of the Lazy DM's Companion will probably be out before the end of this year. That's already September, isn't it? October, November, December. Maybe not. Probably late next year, which means it'll be more than a year between books this time. Like all of 2021, I don't think I'll have put out a book. I think that I would rather take a longer time to put out a bigger book than put out tons and tons of small stuff. Now, I think if I do put out small stuff, I will, and I'll do it on Patreon. Like, I think Patreon is a really good way to put out small projects and get into people's hands. And I think that will work out. It's also like, I just don't want to handle 50 SKUs, right? I don't want to have like a bunch of products that I have to manage because I like putting them out in multiple stores. And if you have multiple products in multiple stores, now I got like hundreds of products I got to track. I'd rather do big ones. So writing is 10% of the work. This is when asked like what advice I would give to myself, it's ensuring that I recognize, it's probably a couple of things that I'm going to talk about here. One of them is that it turns out the act of actually writing the thing is about 10% of the work that's involved in making the thing. And 90% of it is the production side of it. Going through hiring the people to do all of the other pieces that need to get done, making sure it's clean, doing play testing, figuring out distribution, running the Kickstarter, all of that stuff, which I throw into the general term of production. Production is like 90% of the work, and the writing is like 10% of the work. And the writing is the easiest part. Right? I don't have any trouble writing the stuff that I do. And the production is really hard, right? You have a lot of waiting for people, a lot of like coordination, a lot of weird cycles, a lot of stuff like that. So it's really hard. In the question of how do you find artists, mappers, layout artists, and editors and stuff like that. So, the collaborators, these other people that you need in order to do this capital P production side. What I have found is that artists and cartographers who are available want to be found. So, it's usually not too hard to find them because they're out there. They want to be found. But what I did is I went through and looked through a lot of RPG products, and I look at the artists who did them, and I tried to find them on Twitter, or I tried to find their portfolios online, and then I emailed them or I tweeted them. I sent a message to them and said, hey, here's who I am. Here's the kind of project I'm looking at. Would you be interested? Right. And I got a lot of good people from that. I got to work with a lot of different people who are, working on lots of projects. Like, Wolfgang Bauer one time said, hey, I saw your new book. Wow, it looks really familiar. And it was because everybody else who worked on the book was somebody who'd worked on Global Press. And I thought that was pretty funny. Right. I think with Grindelroot, right? He looked at Grindelroot. He's like, wow, Mark Radel and Brian Syme and all these people that worked on Global Press. I'm like, yeah. So, it was, so reaching out and getting in touch with them and working with them is great. One thing that I did that was really smart, actually really smart, listen to me. One thing I did that worked out really well, and I did it early, was in Fantastic Adventures. I was not sure about cartographers or artists. I knew I wanted to have cartographers and artists doing work, but wasn't sure how to do it. And I tried to get like 4 or 5 different cartographers and artists together, and I gave each one of them a single art assignment. And then I would see how they came back. And if they came back quickly, they got more. If they came back slowly, they got fewer. If they didn't come back, they didn't get any more, right? And that worked out pretty well. And that's how I found out that like Jack Kaiser is like an art machine, right? And that's why like Jack did all of the art for Ruins of the Grindelroot, all the main art for Ruins of the main art. That's not right. All that like quarter page art for Ruins of the Grindelroot and the cover Jack Kaiser did. Because Jack can just consistently hammer out art. He is really, really good. And I love his style on top of everything else, right? So you'll hear it from other people that like, there's sort of 3 things you need in order to freelance in your job. You need to be talented enough to get work. You need to be on time, and you need to not be a dick, right? And if you're all 3 of those things, you're going to be good. And that's interesting because 2 of the 3 don't have anything to do with talent. And I've heard people that say like, I'll live with somebody being a dick if they're talented. And maybe, and the thing is like in a freelance world, you don't know if they're dicks or not. You just know that are they getting in their stuff on time? Because guess what? Art that isn't on time might as well be a blank sheet of paper, right? So that style of going through, and we did that again when we did Fantastic Layers. We had a number of different, we had actually a bunch of different freelancers for that. We had a bunch of cartographers, we had a bunch of artists, and we had a bunch of writers because we did the Fantastic Layers campaign guides, right? The campaign summaries. And so we had 10 writers or something for that. So what that meant was we were able to go through a lot of them, and some did great, some didn't come up with as much, and some missed spec, stuff like that. But we were able to try them all out, and it meant that we had enough sort of plate spinning that nothing was a disaster. We didn't have anything where we were dependent upon one person to finish something, and oh my God, we're not going to get the book out. It was like, no, we're good. And it worked out really well. So that style worked well for Fantastic Layers. It certainly worked well for Fantastic Adventures, the original Fantastic Adventures. With Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master and with Ruins of the Grindelroot, I gambled a little bit by working with artists that I had worked with that I worked with artists that I had worked with in the past that I knew could produce. I knew Brian Syme had no trouble making art. I knew that Jack Kaiser had no problem making art. I knew that Elvin Tower had no problem doing maps. And so I dumped a bunch on them, 10 maps and 10, 11 pieces, 12 pieces of art and like 26 pieces of internal spot art and stuff like that. And that worked out because they were 3 people I had worked with before. Actually, I hadn't worked with Brian Syme before, but Mark Radel, who did the art direction, had. And I knew Brian Syme well, so that was fine, right? That I wouldn't say lucky. It was just I knew that his reputation came from somebody else who knew that he could return a lot of art, and he did, and he was really great. Gilblick says, what do you define as spec? Spec is like what you ask for. Are you getting what you ask for? Right. So if I write an art order up, I expect to get an art returned to me that matches that art order. It also means, I think it means that they give feedback. They give you sketches. They show you, before they've put too much investment in it, they give you an idea about what they've done so that you're not wasting time on either side. Oh no, wait, that wasn't what I'm talking about at all. Right. And in some cases we had like major changes in art. I laughed about Fantastic Adventures because in some circumstances we rewrote the adventure to fit the art. Right. It was easier to change the adventure than to change the art. And so we did that. In the case of Max, you sent a basic sketch. I did. Yeah. So I sketched out the maps. I sketched out the maps for all of the maps I did and sent those in, and that seemed to work just fine. I had no issues there. I'm doing an experiment with the maps in the Lazy DM's companion of just giving a high level guidance for what the map should look like, and hoping that they come back and then getting like a sketch back to say like, is that what I'm looking for? And that's because I'm more interested in getting some of the creative energy out of the cartographer in this case. Like I can come up with stuff, but I'd like them to come up with stuff too. So we'll see how that works. So that worked really well. Editors are really hard to find, right? I haven't found editors. I think that there's good ways, and if you ask around on Twitter and if you ask people, I would ask my friend James Intercasso and I would ask Scott Fitzgerald Gray if they know of other editors. I am very lucky that Scott Fitzgerald Gray and I worked together now for more than 10 years, and he and I know that we work well together. Both of us have now worked on many, many projects. Scott has edited every book I've done since Fantastic Adventures. Did he do Fantastic Locations too? He might have. Hang on, let's take a look. I can't remember if he did the editing for Yeah, he did, right? Scott Gray. So Fantastic Locations, man, this book looks beautiful. I'm impressed by my own work. So since Fantastic Locations, which is pretty much every major book that I've done since the original Lazy Dungeon Master, which was edited by a friend of mine. So Scott and I have worked on it ever since then. And we get along, right? We work well together. I know he's just a fantastic dude, very busy guy, works on tons of stuff, does tons of work for Wizards of the Coast and many other companies, and is very nice to me that he keeps his schedule open to work on my stuff too. And that's wonderful. So Scott has it all, and I'm very, very lucky to be able to do that. Layout folks are also tough to find. I don't know why. And so this question came up on Discord earlier. So yeah, layout folks are hard to find. And I think it's because there's like a steeper sort of learning curve to becoming a good layout artist. You really need to know what you're doing. There's a level of technical proficiency in being a layout artist that you can't just kind of muddle through. So like an editor, good editors are obviously fantastic, and I am not knocking professional editors, but there is this idea like if your friend reads your stuff and helps you out, that's a level of editing you don't have on your own, right? If you like really don't have anything at all, you can get someone else to read a thing and give you suggestions or think, oh, that sentence isn't clear. It's not nearly as good as a professional editor, right? But it's something. But you can't do that with layout, really, right? Like layout, like somebody has to own InDesign, right? Somebody's got to know how InDesign works. And there's a lot of tricky bits to it that I just can't do. So every so often you find somebody who's really good. And now one of the things that's also very interesting, Scott Gray is a fantastic layout guy. So having the editor for a book also be the layout person of a book is really nice because it means that they can do editing in layout, right? And it speeds up a process significantly. So we did that with Fantastic Layers, and it was a huge benefit. And I'm doing it again with the Lazy DM's Companion. Scott Gray is responsible for both editing and layout, and that is so much better than having separate editors and layouts because you have to constantly cycle back and forth and time frames and timelines and everything like that. In this case, it's all on one person, so that works really well. So yeah, I don't really have great advice for finding a layout person. When you find one, stay with them. That's all I can recommend. So one thing that I've learned over a few different projects now is that especially for internal art, it's really hard If you're going to get art to flow well into your text inside layout, it means it's got to be in series. It means that you're going to have to do your layout first and then see where your spots are and then commission the art and then wait for the art to come in. And that can be a long time. And we've now done this. So like for Grendelroot, what I tried is I commissioned 30 pieces of internal art without necessarily knowing what was going to go where, including 10 pieces I thought were kind of universal pieces I could put anywhere. And that kind of worked, but there were still spots where I needed stuff and didn't have it. And then there were spots where I had art that I had that I didn't need. And so that didn't work particularly well. And I want to know how the pros do it. I want to go reach out to some people that I know really do this, much more professionally than I, and find out how they handle that, right? Because you just don't know how things are going to lay out on a page until you're done. So like a hard part with the Lazy DM's Companion is we're going to do editing and layout first, and then we're going to commission more art, right? And it means it's going to take longer because it takes a while for art to come back. So that is, it's going to be tricky. I already talked about people not digging your favorite work as much as you do. I'm jumping all over the map, by the way, in this question. But yeah, your favorite thing may not be their favorite thing, right? And you got to, this is a big one. So when we say like, what are the things you wish you had learned previously? Things I would have told myself, like before I did Fantastic Locations, let's say the early days where I did my first Kickstarters, there's probably a few like key pieces of advice that I would give to myself. And one is that, what was the other one? There was one up here that I thought was, writing is 10% of the work, production is the other 90%, right? That you need to know that like writing is the easy part. Building the thing is the hard part. And you just don't think that way. I don't think that way right now. I'm like, no, writing's the hard part, right? It's like, no, it really isn't. The other one is that money is rarely the limiting factor. We look at Kickstarters and we're like, oh man, if only I could get a $50,000 Kickstarter. Oh, I'd have everything I need. And the answer is like, you don't need that, right? First of all, you don't need it. And that's not what's actually making the product hard. That building the thing is hard. That the time and the energy and the effort and the project management, the logistics, these are the things that make it hard. The cash is not hard. I mean, it can't, it's arrogant as hell. Like cash is hard too, but it's probably not what's going to be the hard part, right? And if you think that the money is going to be the solution, it is not the solution, right? That all these other things are really hard and it is really easy. It doesn't matter if you have the money, it's still really easy to screw up a project. So yeah, money is not the main thing. Another one that's kind of related to this is, and people who have come into our Discord and kind of ask about their things, is that you can get really far in your project before you need any money at all. Right? That just get started, right? Do those prototypes, test things out. We had somebody in the Discord the other day who said, hey, I want to write a big campaign world that I want to put up on Kickstarter. How do I do that? Right? And we're like, whoa. And we said, like, before you start thinking about writing a big ass campaign world that you're going to put up on Kickstarter, and there's a bunch of things like people might not love it like you love it, right? That's what we talked about before. But why don't you pick like the most interesting town in your campaign world and write like a 3-page introduction to that town? Right? Like write a tiny little thing. You break down your giant thing into a tiny little thing and test it out. What makes your campaign world unique among campaign worlds? That's sticky enough that people are going to want to play it. And if you can't get that into like 3 pages, then you probably don't have one, right? I don't know, more arrogant. So, start with a small project and you can do a lot on your own. You've got a lot of tools on your own to do it. And between like cool page layouts that you can find online and being able to get artwork that offers what do they call it? Licensable artwork. There's a name for it. There's a lot of licensable artwork that you can use to make projects. Lots of people in the DMs Guild are doing this. I've talked to a bunch of people that are using a lot of different spot art that they're able to pick up and legally use, right? Without commissioning it. And it's like $5, right? Like the art stuff that you can use your product is like $5 and you can use it in commercial works, so you can get really far. Like the fact that Dyson logo, Dyson has like 500 maps, more than 500 maps that are usable in a commercial product with no license, with no money back. They have a license, but you don't have to pay them. That's, you can make a lot of stuff with that. So yeah, you can get really far on a project before you need money, right, to back it up. And then when you need money, most of it should be done, right? You should not kickstart and be like, hey, I kickstarted this thing and then I'll start writing, right? The Lazy DM's Companion is going to be in Scott Gray's hands for editing and layout. The whole book for editing and layout before we launch the Kickstarter, right? The book is done. I've already written it, right? I've already written it. People have already seen it. Patrons have been playing with it, right? So the material has been around now for a while, like most of it. I mean, some of it I just wrote, right? But yeah, so you write it first. And I always do this. I think every Kickstarter I've done, I guess this wasn't true for Fantastic Layers because we really didn't know that we were going to do them. But we'd written most of those layers before the Kickstarter was finished. And then we wrote a lot. And so really after the Kickstarter was when it was second drafts and things like that. So money isn't the limiting factor, and you can do a whole lot on your own, before you need a Kickstarter to do the rest. So, oh my God, let's make a campaign book. You write parts and drop it at the editor's nightmare. Yeah, right. MCDM recently posted how fouled up the supply chain is. Yeah, it really hurts. Can't get paper for the product for 4 to 6. I'm worried about this, right? I'm confident I'm going to get a PDF of an awesome Lazy DM's companion into your hands, right? I'm very confident in that. I'm really hoping. I'm working with an offset printer. We have a good logistics angle. I'm working with Nord Games is going to be handling all of the distribution and fulfillment on this. I'm working with them. They're very confident in it. They've done it with a lot of Kickstarters, and I'm still really scared to death. So it's really, the world is a weird place, and it might be hard to get these physical books into people's hands. On the other hand, you will definitely have the digital versions, so you'll be able to play with it right away. Pretty close to right away. So I back both products from MCDM. Yeah, I have backed all the MCDM stuff too. And I'll just be patient. More advice I wish I had given myself. Start a newsletter, right? Hey, past Mike Shea, start a newsletter. Don't wait freaking 10 years before you start a newsletter. Email is the future of social media. The email is the future of social media marketing. You can argue with me if you want, but man, you'll have to trust that I've done a lot of thought, and I've talked to a lot of people who have been trying to market stuff on the new social media platforms. And guess what those platforms don't want you to do? They don't want you leaving their platform. They want you to stay there. If you look at Twitter and you start seeing tweets where people say like, hey, check out my new thing. We worked really hard on it. Here's a picture. Link in the following tweet, right? And then you have to go one tweet in order to click on it. That's because Twitter is removing tweets from people's timelines that have links to external stuff, and you have to bury it. So social media networks are not your friend when it comes to marketing. Facebook wants you to pay, right? And Facebook is very effective if you pay, and you have to pay a lot for Facebook marketing, right? Instagram and TikTok, I have no idea if TikTok works at all. I haven't even tried it, but I don't think it works any better than the others. Instagram is great if you want somebody to pay attention to your work for 1/3 of a second. Right? If you want someone's attention for 1/3 of a second, Instagram is your go-to. If you want their attention for 4 seconds, I don't even think it's 4 seconds. 2 seconds, Twitter, right? I don't know I don't know what you get on Facebook, but email newsletters, they respond, right? I get way, way, way better response rate from my email newsletter than I do from any other source, right? It's the number one best way to get it. And Patreon, right? It took me a while to get on Patreon. I'm really happy I'm there. It's questions like this. The people out there are outstanding. The people are helping me out. Great stuff. Really supportive. Awesome group. So I pushed the newsletter heavy. I would say YouTube is the other one. YouTube has really been helpful. I think that you're probably watching this. So shockingly valuable. Right? Something like 40% of the people who find my Patreon find it through YouTube. And it's double what any other source is, including the website that I've run for like 15 years, which is kind of sad, but it's true. So start a newsletter. Newsletter, really, really powerful tool. It's an email newsletter is a social network you control. It's one that you build, right? Somebody hosts it, but you build. Thoughts on Discord? I love Discord. It is not a marketing platform. Discord is what do I treat it as? I mean, first of all, Discord is my water cooler. It's where I hang out with people and talk about stuff. But, as a marketing platform, it's very low, right? It's far more likely people are going to find me through other ones and then end up on Discord, not the other way around. So it's a great way to stay in continual touch with people who care about your nonsense. And that's why I am happy there. It is a bit like opening a bar. People show up, they sit on the corner chair, and they're there for the rest of your life, right? So you can't really control who's there. Hopefully they're all cool. I'm lucky because they're all cool. But yeah, it's hard. And you got to maintain it. And you need moderators. And you need to do hard things, right? It's tricky. It's something that you got to manage a lot. But it's not a marketing. I don't really see Discord as a marketing thing. I'm pretty sure I could shut off my Discord server and not lose any real impact and not lose anything. But it's a really fun place to hang out. And I like it. I do it because I like it. It's a lot less stress than it is to go hang out on other social media networks. So start a newsletter. So I used print on demand, and I would recommend it for small publications. Oh God, I banged the mic. But I have a shock mount now, so now I have a shock mount, so you won't hear springs for 30 seconds. Somebody asked about the Discord, so we'll get a link to the Discord. So so I have done everything print on demand up till now. Right. And I probably waited too long to go with offset printing. And of course, I wait until there's like a global shipping catastrophe to get into offset printing. Good job, Mike Shea. But generally speaking, I couldn't have expected the success that I've expected. And it's far safer to go with a print on demand option. DriveThruRPG and Amazon both offer really good print on demand options. And so if you're making a book and you don't know how many people you're going to make, if it's probably less than a couple thousand copies, you're probably better off going with print on demand. And you're going to get some complaint. Like when I did print on demand with Kickstarter, you get complaints. You get like, why am I paying for some over and over again? I had a guy who got really upset about it. And it was like, the dude didn't read the Kickstarter page, right? All over our Kickstarter. It's the only question we had in our FAQ was, hey, when it comes time, you're going to have to pay for the cost of printing. Right. And that's why it was only $5 more. And like, I went back and forth, with this guy. And it was like, he's like, how come I have to pay 4 times more for the book? And I'm like, the book was $15 in PDF and $20 in print. What'd you miss? And he's like, oh, I was looking at a different Kickstarter. And you're like, oh my God, you got to read the Kickstarter page, man. So you're going to get people who don't read anything and they just click buttons and throw money and they didn't realize what they bought. And they'll see like, ooh, $20 for a print copy of a book. Awesome. Without realizing, yeah, that's $20. You're also paying the cost of printing, which is going to be like another 10, and you're going to pay shipping, which is like $6. So it's going to be like $36 or more. Like Fantastic Layers, the printing was more expensive because it was hardcover. The flexibility you get though is you can get multiple versions. So during the Kickstarter, we could say like, hey, one of the versions we're going to offer now is a hardcover version, and you get to pick which one you want because you're paying the cost. Right? But you're only paying the cost. Like I don't get any extra money depending on which one you buy. If you buy the soft cover or the hardcover, it's the same amount of money to me. But you get to decide, do you want to pay the extra $10 for a hardcover version that's going to be a lot prettier? Or now it's like $20 more, right? So print on demand was better. Print on demand is a lot of flexibility. It's a little bit of a weird model, a weird distribution and fulfillment model. Most people get it, but you're going to get 2 or 3 people that are going to complain and just refund their money. Just, I'm very sorry. Here's your $20 back. Right. And that's what I did with the guy. Like, I get it. You didn't read the page. I'm sorry you felt like you were going to get $120 worth of books for $20. Here's your $20 back, right? It's irritating. And obviously, like, we had whatever number 3,800 backers, and I remember that one, right? Like, how come I not remember the other 3,799 who love the book and we're totally happy with it? So you're going to get a couple complaints, and it's hard not to take it personally. But that's kind of how it works. So print on demand is a really good option when you're doing small runs of things. It's a great way to get a physical book into someone's hands and not have to put a big order in, and basically move the cost to not move the cost, there's no risk, right? So you're not moving the risk. Everyone's risk is diminished, right? You're not going to go broke depending on how things change. Like imagine this scenario, right? So DriveThruRPG recently increased the prices of their books significantly, in some cases like 20%, right? Like if you go now to, I hope everybody who got Fantastic Layers got it when it was cheap. Whoops, that's not right. D&D Beyond, what am I going there for? So the Fantastic Layers in hardcover is $48, right? It's nearly $50, really close to $50. I think it was at least $10, maybe $15 cheaper than that when we did the Kickstarter and when people could originally get it. When the bulk of the people that ordered it, it was like $15 less than that. So imagine if instead I had said, hey, I'm going to go ahead and take on the cost of printing, and I expected it to be $35. So that's what I asked for. And then every single copy went up $15. We go broke. Right? We probably wouldn't have had enough money. We probably wouldn't have gotten paid at all. We probably made nothing. We might go make less than nothing. We might go in the red because the cost of the book went up and everybody's still expecting their book. And they're like, hey, I paid my $35. And we can't be like, hey, sorry, you need to pay more. Right? Like there are Kickstarters who have done that and it's terrible. So yeah, that's a risk. So it works a lot better. I think it works a lot better to say, hey, customer, we're only going to charge you an extra $5, right? So it's $15 for the PDF. It's $20 for the PDF and the ability to order as many print copies as you want, right? You can order hardcover and softcover if you want, right? You can have multiple copies of this book if you want. So you get to pick what format you want. You can even have multiple formats, and you only have to pay us $5 more. And then you pay the cost of printing, which is a lot less than $48, right? I don't know what it costs, but it's less than $48. So that I think that works well for small things. If I was doing a Kickstarter where I expected to get less than 1,000 people, I would probably still go with that. I think, of course, Return ended up going gangbusters. And Fantastic Layers, I think we probably sold 2,000 of them. So probably we should have gone with offset printing, right? But you don't know. And I didn't even know who to talk to about it. That's why I'm partnering with Nord. Nord actually knows people. Nord, they've worked with a printer. They know how to get stuff around. They know how to distribute. They've got all kinds of stuff. They've done lots of this, and they offer that as a service, right? And so that's why my next Kickstarter, I'm working with Nord to help me with that fulfillment. And I'm still scared to death. So on the question of, we have this how do you find artists? How is the sausage made? The process, you go from idea to finished product. So I thought I'd spend a little time talking about ideas. Right? Where do ideas come from? It's interesting that you produced audiobooks. What was the tangent for you, or something that you definitely wanted to do? I really wanted to do audiobooks, and I think Colby Elliott reached out to me originally to do the Lazy Dungeon Master audiobook. And he did it, and he did a beautiful job. I said it was really humbling to hear my words coming out of such a professional voice, right? Because I could even hear problems in the grammar. I was like, oh God, I wrote that, and it sounds terrible. And he did Return as well. And then Rudy Basso was a friend of James Intercasso and myself. So Rudy was the logical choice. Rudy reached out and said, hey, how would you like to do it for locations and adventures? And so we did. And then I think Colby ended up doing Gren. So yeah, so it worked out to that we had artists who wanted to work with us. Two in particular, Rudy Basso and Colby Elliott, who wanted to work with me to turn my stuff into an audiobook. And it worked great. The problem is it doesn't work for everything. It's not going to work for the Lazy DM's Companion, right? It's just a book of tables. A lot of it is a book of tables. So there's not really a good way to do an Audible version of that. But I love that. And I love it because it also adds accessibility. It means that people who can't see or have a lot of trouble seeing or many other kinds of problems can get the audiobook and listen to it. Or some people that just want to digest it that way. So I'm really happy that I was able to do audiobooks, and I think more people should. I'd love the D&D books to be an Audible. So yeah. Where do ideas come from? I like Neil Gaiman. From a little ideas shop in Bognor Regis, right? That's what Neil Gaiman likes to say, because they're like, who knows where ideas come from? So where do ideas come from? Who knows? The whole world, right? The answer is everywhere, right? So, but I'll tell you something that helps me gel ideas, right? And that's making myself come up with lists of 10. And I love to do this, and I do it for all kinds of things. And the idea of going for a walk and saying, by the end of this walk, I want to have 10 X's. I want to have 10 article ideas. I want to have 10 ideas for Lazy DM companion pages. I want to have 10 fantastic monuments. I want to have 10 whatever, right? And that idea of going through 10, I wanted 10 video ideas for YouTube, and coming up with that list of 10. It's just like secrets and clues, right? I basically took that same idea of secrets and clues and applied it to everything, right? And that idea is it's pretty easy to come up with a few, and then it gets harder and harder and harder, and you really scrape the bottom of the barrel, and you scrape your brain, and every so often something really miraculous comes up at the end. But then what I do is I call the list, right? Maybe I look at the 10, and not all of them are good, and so I cut a bunch, right? And I think Steve Jobs talked about this, that he took all of his executives from all the branches of Apple, and they went on a big retreat. I think this might be folklore, but who knows? It's a good story anyway. And he went on a big retreat, and he said, okay, we're going to look at the entire product line of Apple, and we're going to come up with a list of 10 major things that we're going to work on in the next, 2 years or whatever. And they fought their asses off, and everybody was pitching their idea, and everybody's wanted their thing to get on the list, and they did it, and they got down, and they fought for 2 days, and it goes, great, we're doing the top 3, right? And they cut the 7. They cut the 7, things. And that's the way this works too. Those 10, not all of them are going to get written. Not all of them are going to get shot. Not all of them are going to turn into things. You take the best ones and you dump the rest. And I have, I think 100 Sly Flourish articles, something like that. Let's see if I can, give me a second. I'll look it up. Whoops. Yeah. Where is it? My unpublishable. Is it unpublishable crap? Published articles and dead bugs. So I have, if I do get info on this, is this going to go in properties? I have 112 Sly Flourish articles that are never going to hit the website. 112. That's more than 2 years. More than 2 years worth of articles that is never going to actually show up on the site. And that's because they're not very good, right? And I think my other ones are better. So yeah, I like that better. How do you remember your ideas when you finish the block? I have Notion on my phone, and I usually create a new page in Notion that says 10 whatever, and I'm walking, and I use the audio dictation feature. I'll hit it, and I'll just jot a note and hit it, jot a note, and jot a note. I usually try to get like 3 in my head before I put all 3 down. Not that that matters at all. I don't remember them, that's for sure. I would never. I know that I can keep basically 3 of them in my head, and the minute I hit a 4th, the other one gets flushed. It's just the way my brain works. I can't remember a 4th. So I really like this idea. And we did it for Fantastic Layers. That in Fantastic Layers, we all came up with, I think we all came to the table with like 20 ideas or something like that. I think we had like 60 originally, and called until we had, the 20 that we had. And then we ended up taking 3 more. I think we had like we took some of them and put them out for people to vote on, and then they selected, and then we took the top 3 from that. So we did a lot of culling to get to the layers that are in the book, right? And we had many layers. I think it was like 60 layers that we had discussed, and only did 23 of them, right? And those 23 are better. So I think that works really well. I think that idea of like, just give you quantity is a really good thing when it comes to ideas. Just pump out a bunch of ideas. NPCs come up with 10, whatever. And these lists can be big or small, right? So it could be, hey, 10 universes, right? 10 different weird ass universes. I can't get bigger than that, I don't think, right? Or 10 vendors at the shady market, right? Not quite as big. 10 campaign worlds, right? Or 10 devious traps. So whatever the 10 things are, they can be big or small. They can be, and this is not just great for writing products, right? This is great for D&D, right? Come up with 10 ideas. Come up, if you're thinking of like, I don't know what my next session is going to be like, or I don't really know what the next arc of my adventure is going to be like, right? 10 arcs. What are the 10 arcs of the adventure that your character is going to deal with, right? And then pick the ones that sound cool and come up with some good ideas. So I really love that list of 10. I like to seed myself with questions. So when I'm making a product, my drive is to help DMs run great D&D games, right? It's my number one goal for Sly Flourish. It's not make money. It's not push out books. It's not boost my ego, I don't think. It's not, schmooze with the stars. It's not be everyone's best friend. I want to help DMs run great D&D games. I think the game is important. I've said this before. I think D&D is important. I think it's an important, valuable tool that can save lives. I think that it can make people happier. I think that it makes the world a better place. I really do. And so boosting ego is an indirect bonus. So I really want to help DMs run great games. So I really try to ask myself regularly, what will help DMs run better games? What do they need? What's the hard part? What friction is in the way that's making it harder for people to run D&D games? What ways could the game be simpler and easier to run? How can we take what pieces of it can be kind of grabbed and changed and just turned into something easier? I'm going to talk a lot about this is tomorrow Sunday? I don't even know. I think tomorrow is Sunday, right? And I'm going to talk about Numenera, right? I'm going to talk about Numenera and Cypher, and like they have figured out how to make things easier, right? So lots of things. I think about that all the time. And I like when I go on these walks of these creative walks, particularly when I'm thinking about like a new product or a new article or a new video, I try to think about like, what are the hard parts? Like, what are the things? What are the obvious things, right? Like it's easy to go like, what's the outlandish thing that no one's thinking about? But what are the obvious things that we're missing? Like I just wrote an article today. All right. I was at the mall hanging out, sitting with my mask on, writing D&D stuff. And I was saying, I wrote an article about the flow of the core mechanic, right? If we have this idea of the way D&D works is that a DM describes the situation, a player describes how they want their character, what they want their character to do, and the DM arbitrates the results. And like sometimes when the DM arbitrates the results, they ask for an ability check, and the player rolls an ability check for their character to do a thing. It's like the simplest core piece. And I don't know that we're doing it right. I don't think most of us are doing it right. I don't think I'm doing it right. And we talked about this in Discord yesterday, and I'm like, I need to write an article about like the smooth, what's the smooth progression of the ability check? Right. Well, that's like the most basic thing in D&D you can do. And I still think it's worth 800 words to talk about how to smooth that out a little bit. It's why I focus on things like encounter balance. Encounter balance is such a pain in the ass. Like, I'm willing to do 5 different systems. Right. So I like to seed myself with these questions, and I like to ask myself, what is easier? What can I do to help make it easier for DMs to run great games? I do that. I do that all the time. Arpurabusia says, so let's say other people think I'm a good DM. What's the next step to publish a thing that may be useful to someone else and perhaps gain some money? If you're aiming for money, you're probably in the wrong business. There's probably faster, easier ways to do it. I don't have a good advice because the world is different than when I started. So I don't know what it does today. Hopefully getting attention is the hardest part, right? And that's probably another like key lesson, right? Getting, everybody's got that, right? Everybody's got ideas. Everybody's got the cool thing that they want to do. Some would say, go put it up in the DMs Guild and see. I'm not crazy about the DMs Guild, and I've talked about that before. A website is really good. Start a newsletter, right? Start building a newsletter and try to get people to come to your newsletter to do it. YouTube videos are not bad. Like, if, talking about your thing on YouTube, I think is not a terrible way to do it. I've had a lot of luck there, but I might just be really lucky. But I would probably make it small, do it yourself, and if it's, talk to people on Reddit. I see a lot of people on Reddit like, hey, I built a thing and I want to try it out. Try that, right? Try it out. But money is really, really hard to come by in this hobby. It's a definitely, very small minority of people are able to actually pull a decent dollar from this. What else? What was I thinking about? Yeah. Getting attention is the hardest part. Yeah, so I like to get back to the basics. I talked about this. I talked, what are the core mechanics in D&D? What's the simplest D&D game we can imagine? If you strip D&D down to its core, what does its core look like? I like to think about this. I like to think about, just don't forget what the game is, right? Like, on one side, I think it saves lives. I really do. I think it breaks loneliness. I think it helps it's a catalyst for people to get together and laugh and be creative together. And wow, there's not a lot of that in the world these days, right? It's that or conspiracy meetings. Like, let's go join the Flat Earth Society, where they also have a fantasy world that they live in, and they build communities about it. So instead of that, right, let's have our own fake worlds and we get together about that. So on one side, I think it saves lives. I think it's really important. The other side, it's like, look, it's about a bunch of adventurers going through a dungeon fighting monsters, right? And like trying to narrow it down to that and not forgetting what it is at its core, I think can really help, right? I'm not trying to get like all old school about it, because there's lots of ways that you can have adventures, lots of things going on. But I think it's easy to get sort of overwhelmed by all of the options in D&D when the answer is like, it's 4 characters going through a hallway, fighting a gelatinous cube, right? Which is a pretty awesome D&D adventure. So my friend Scipio202 from Discord, this is from the Patreon Discord, had some questions after I posted this and said, other than where ideas come from, are there parts of the book or process or lessons learned that have impacted your regular DMing? So like things that I kind of have learned while publishing that ended up affecting how I run my own games. And one of them is like, yeah, I steal all the time, right? I don't make stuff anymore. And it is egotistical. Like, if I'm drawing a map, it's because it's going in a book, right? I don't draw maps for the game that I'm going to run on Wednesday. I steal maps for the game I do on Wednesday. And so should you, right? Like, go find, again, Dyson is handing you 1,000 maps. I guarantee you he's thought more about maps than you do. Why would you use a map of his, right? So yeah, so that's a big one. Like, I don't make new monsters, right? Like, if I'm making a monster, I better be making a buck for it, because why would I spend all of that time and energy to make a monster that's going to die in three rounds, right? That's not great. So, so I definitely spend less time preparing my games, which could be bad, and then have this egotistical, like, I'm not gonna, like, if I'm creating something because I want to give it to 1,000 people. And it's not because I don't love the 5 to 7 people that are around 5 to 6 people that are around my table, because in many cases they are more important to me than anybody else in my life. And but I can run a better game for them if I grab pieces and go, right? Swingset Park asks, what do you do when you've published something you disagree with? This is a good one. This is a really good question. I got stumped by this a little bit. What do you do when you've published something you disagree with later, or that you just don't use? Do you revise your old stuff? He said, I think this is their example. For example, the Kickstarter will have the spiral-bound Lazy DMs workbook, but there are rules and tables related to Monster CR that I don't think I've seen you use in your videos. You seem to use your Deadly Encounter benchmark and then adjust the dials. So if you think CR differently now than you did, why print the old stuff? So that he's absolutely right. That like in the Lazy DM's workbook, which I'm immensely proud of, right? This book is fantastic. But where is it? So page 7, I think we have a couple of pages. Hey, I banged the mic and it's not going to be bad. Yeah, page 7 and page 20 both have sections in there that I'm now writing new things for the companion. And I think in this case it's fine because the sections that are in the Lazy DM workbook still work, right? The encounter building guidelines that are in the workbook still work. I have newer and better ones. That doesn't mean the ones that are in here don't work, right? The philosophies in the original Lazy Dungeon Master book have changed. Do I have a copy of that sitting here? I should, right? It's my own goddamn book. I think it's on the shelf. I don't have a copy. The original, I should get a copy and put it on my shelf. So the original Lazy Dungeon Master book has a process that I don't even use myself yet. I've talked about this in interviews that I've done. And that's why I wrote Return, right? Now, I will say for Return, like I still use the process in Return years after I wrote it. So I think that one was more solid. But people like the original Lazy Dungeon Master. And if they stopped buying it, I'd be okay. I'd be like, that's fine. If you like Return better, I like Return better. But I'm not going to take it off the shelf because people dig it. And they use it and they read it and they like it and it works for them. So who am I to say they shouldn't use it anymore or those rules are bad now, right? Like they're not bad. They kind of worked. They worked back then. There's just new stuff now, right? So far, there's very little where I look at it and go, yeah, that was a mistake. Abrausia says, man, Return is way better. I think so. I think Return is a fantastic book. And I think if you bought the first, there's a reason why it's only $8. It's worth $15 easy. That PDF is definitely worth $15. But it's $8 because I wanted people to buy it and the original was $6. And I'm like, I don't want to make it much more. I don't want to have a $6 book and a $15 book. So I made it specifically, basically half the price that it should be. So everyone's getting a deal. That's $7 back to every fan. There is one part in the Lazy DM's workbook that I don't agree with and I think actually doesn't work. And it made it in here anyway. And I've used it, but I've used it since and I didn't like it. And it's on page 7 at the bottom is a section about pooling the hit points of a horde if you're running a large number of monsters. And in this case, I suggested adding up all of the hit points of the monsters into a pool and then subtracting from the pool. And that's really untenable. If you try to do it this way, it really hurts. And the way that's going to be in the companion is far better. So should I change the book, though? The problem is, like, it's really hard to go back and reprint a new copy of the book. It takes a lot of work. So I'm like, well, 3 paragraphs in 1 page of a 30-page book, I'll live with it, right? It's not great. I wish it wasn't there. I wish it was different. And it's not the end of the world. And it kind of works. It's just clunky. It's not nearly as clean as the new one is. But the answer is I don't fix the old stuff. I move forward, right? New books will have new things. And I try. The one thing that I worry about with the companion is that I'll put the companion out and immediately think of new things, right? So the nice thing is I've been working on the companion for a long time. So if there's something, an errata, it's not really an errata. I mean, kinda, I don't know, whatever. But you go to my website and read it and you can read new ones and the companion will have new ones. So in the case, there's a little bit of overlap between the companion and the workbook, but not a lot. And in most cases, what the companion states is, hey, these rules, you can use these rules instead of the rules that are in the workbook. Like this is an update of the rules in the workbook. They still both work, right? And you can still pick them. And there's probably people, certainly from the encounter building guidelines, which is what Swingset Park here mentioned. Certainly from the encounter building guidelines, the ones that are in the workbook work just fine. I just have a simpler way. So, hey, wow, 1 month streak. Thank you for the subscription. So yeah, so that it's an interesting topic. Like, how does that work, right? And it really only matters like when I'm doing a book like the companion, where it's like the 3rd book in the Lazy DM series. I am glad that it took me 3 years to do the 3rd book, right? And that's because I've now had 3 more years to think about it. I still very much agree with the things that are in Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master. So this is not at all a big change to the philosophies of Return. It is just this is really going to sit right alongside those 2 other books, right? And I think I'm very happy about it, and I'm really excited. And God, I can't wait to get it in people's hands because I think it's really great. And if you want to see most of what's in there, but in its raw state, go to my Patreon, the adventure generators and uncovered secrets, those are what are going to form into the companion. For patrons, though, they're going to see a few things that aren't going to end up making it into the companion. The companion is going to have a 64-page hard limit, and that's because it's offset printed. So we can't add 16 more pages or whatever. You have to do it in 16-page blocks. 64 pages felt right. Now, and again, like I can't increase it because all of a sudden all the books costs increase. There are going to be things in the companion that are not available to patrons in the patron thing, but patrons will also have things in the uncovered secrets and adventure generators that aren't going to make its way into the companion. So both groups get both. And if you want all of it, you can subscribe to the Patreon and you can buy the book and you will get all of it. So it's going to be really good. So the advice that I would tell myself when I first started creating products, I've talked about this, and the big ones are I would start a newsletter. I'm gonna make a nice little list of like things that I would tell myself before. Did that not work? What? Start a newsletter. The money isn't everything. You can get really far in your project. All these are good. These guys right here. And writing is 10% of the work. I think those are probably the things I would tell myself. Probably the other one is like, start understanding offset printing earlier. That the print on demand thing works really well. I don't regret doing it with print on demand, but when you hit a certain level of success, pardon my own eye rolling, when you hit a certain number of sales, you really ought to be thinking about offset printing, I think. And it's hard. And the answer is there are now people that you can work with like Nord and others who will help manage that for you. And I think that is a fine way to go. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Appreciate it. Always fun. And I will be on tomorrow morning at 9. And tomorrow we're going to talk about a lot of cool things. If you want a sneak preview, here's a sneak preview of some of the topics for tomorrow. Talk show notes. Oh, how to mix Dwarven Forge with Owlbear is one. Jason S. on Patreon, who asked about, why do you love the Cypher system? I'm going to talk a lot about the Cypher system. The chicken and egg of high-level support in 5e. That's going to be a topic, maybe. Ryan R. And then two more questions from Patreon. So, yeah, it'll be a fun day tomorrow. So, 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, Eastern Standard Time, talk show. 10 a.m., Lazy DM chat. So, good times. All right, everybody, thank you for coming. Have a great evening enjoy your Saturday, and I will see you all tomorrow. Take care.